Hi, everyone. This question is a bit different than the other question that we did in terms of max value in a list of integers. This one is more general, and we are looking to find the max value in a list. So this list can have different items in it. It can have a string, it can have a list. So there could be a list in a list, and we're looking to find the max value. So if there is a list within a list, which has integers in it as well, the max value would be the value that is the greatest among all of these integers in any nested list. Okay, so let's try. This is a bit more complex than some of the examples that we've been doing so far. So let's try this one. Okay, so here I have our max list function from trying to find the maximum in a list of integers. Okay, now what's different about this current question is that we're going to use recursion to return the maximum value in a list, but there's no assumption that it's a list of integers, and the list could possibly also be empty. One example that would be useful to see would be to add, say, a string value here and another sublist here. So we would create another sublist. And this sublist, let's put a big number here, 99 and it could also have a string or any other value. Okay, and the answer when we do max list of list should return 99. Okay, so that's our question. Now let's look at what we've already done for max list, and let's look at what needs to be changed. First, we need to think about our 5 steps that we've talked about. So the parameter, of course, that we're passing is a list. We know that. In this case, we're also passing any sublists. Let's start with the base case. The base case would be if the length of list is 0, if there are no elements in the list. So let's start with that, and we're going to say if the length of list is 0, what are we going to do? We are going to return none. Okay, so that's our base case. And now let's go through the list and traverse each element of the list. So we're going to write a new else here. That's going to be different. But the first thing we are going to do in our new else for finding the maximum value of any list is to assign some kind of temp max. Now, in this case, because we don't know if there's going to be an integer or not in the list, it could have other elements, we are actually going to define a float that is really, really the lowest value, float negative infinity, as the temp max, which means that if there is any integer at all in the list or the sublist, then that would be the maximum number. The next thing we want to do is we actually want to go through every item on the list and to check if that item is an integer or another list. Those are the only 2 conditions we're interested in. So let's start first with a for loop that's going to traverse through the list. Okay, so in this list, let me remove this return so you don't get confused. So in this for loop, as we're looking, forgot my colon. In this for loop, as we're looking to find if an item is a list, we are going to use an if statement, and we're going to use the isInstance function to check if the item that we're now traversing is indeed a list. And if it is, then what do? We know that there is a sublist, there is a nested list. And now we actually want to do, there could be a different max. And so we're going to say max is max list. Well, let's call it a temp max. We have a temp max, so maybe we can call it max in nested. Okay, a max in nested. We're going to call the max list function, but this time we're going to call it on the sublist. Okay, So far, what we've done is we're trying to find if there is another list within this list. And if there is a list, we're going to find the maximum integer value in that list. So we're calling our nested recursive max list function on this new list. And we are going to now check if the max number that we do have right now from our nested list is greater than our temp max. And if it is, what do we do? We make that the max value. So we assign that to max in nested. Okay. If it's not a list, what do we do? Now we've tested if it is a list. Now, if it's not a list, what do we do? Let's do an elif. The elif is not for this one, but for this if, and we do an elif. I want to make sure it's properly aligned. Let's make sure we're all aligned. So this is the elif that we're interested in. We've checked that the item is a list. Now the only other option that we're interested in is if the item is actually an integer. And if it is, we're going to do what we did in our previous example, which is, oh, let me fix that to this instance. We're going to compare if the item that we're checking, we know it's an integer, so we can directly compare, is in fact greater than temp max, then that becomes the temp max. Okay. And we're now going to go ahead and that's it. We're only interested if it is a list or an integer. We've done both of those checks. So now let's get out of our for loop and let's return our temp max. But we return temp max. Now, mind you, we did set it to negative infinity, right? So we don't want that to be return value in case we were not able to find a single integer in the list. So what we are going to do is if temp max, and this is an optional step, but it's a really good coding practice, if it's not equal to, because otherwise it's just going to return negative infinity and we don't want that. That's not something that our user understands. So if it's not equal to float of negative infinity, we return it, else return none. Okay, so this way, if there are no integers in the list, if it's a list of every other element, not an integer, then we will simply return none. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's test out our function. We're going to do max list. And let me give, first let's try an empty list. Let's run the code. Let me clear the screen for you. Let's run the code. And it returned none. So there's no max values in this case. Let's try now to run it on just a simple list of integers, see if that works. And it returned a 3, which is great. And now we're going to have another list embedded within this. Actually, we could use this example that we have here, which is our test case. Let's call that. And it did return 99. Okay. Go back to the function. Let me actually get rid of the output screen and you can look at what we've done. So we do have our base case. In our recursive case, we're going through every item. Now, mind you, you could actually do more, like you could do a double recursive loop, but we're not going to go into that. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to actually use a loop to traverse through every item in the list, check if the item is a list. If it's a sublist, then we call the function again. If it's an integer, we compare it, and then we return the max value. Okay. Hope this example was useful and you found it tricky, but were able to understand it as well. Okay, talk to you soon.